What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, MrBaboon. We back with another reaction. You know what I'm saying? This time we have the Cold War Oversimplified Part 2. So, I'm gonna get this out of the way. You know what I'm saying? Check the description down below if you guys want to check out the video for you guys yourselves. It will be down in the description, and my Part 1 reaction will also be down in the description if you guys want to watch that one. Make sure you guys check out his channel. I'll probably put the link down for that one too as well, most likely. So check that out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Shout if you guys do enjoy, like the video, turn on post notifications if you guys new, and subscribe. So this is part 2 of the Cold War. So let's see, part 1. You know, I'm not even gonna say it. You guys just gotta go watch it. So we're gonna get into this. I'm excited. I thought my chair was stuck on something. My bad. I'm excited to watch this. I like watching his videos. His videos are amazing. The way he puts it together, the editing and everything is just really good. I wish I could do everything he's doing. So we're gonna give this reaction and everything. I know it's gonna be a good video. You know what I'm saying. So I'm not even gonna hold you guys anymore. We're just gonna get into it. Let's get it, and I'm gonna like it because I know it's gonna be a good video.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community where you can learn just about anything. Support my channel by signing up using the link below and get your first 2 months for free. For anyone who thinks recent US history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s. Extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin America, a certain Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's summer playground, and America didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard. So the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan, so he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but they could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just going to suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange.
Funny.
Sir, you need to look at this photograph. You're right. That's the cutest dog I've ever seen. Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely
But the dog was a nice
and they
looking
had to
dog.
act fast. They knew that airstrikes
I don't know how he got that
Cuba
information.
would likely mean nuclear
Actually,
war
I
to
do.
the Soviet Union. So Kennedy came up with another idea, a
and
blockade.
stuff, but
The U.S. Navy announced it
Go
would
watch
stop
that.
and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The U.S. did the same and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed. And for the first time in history, U.S. Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war. The Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and 2 of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the 3rd senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize the decision. The U.S. finalized its preparations, and I kid you not,
I did not know that one.
The U.S. were set to decide the day and time for the Cuban invasion. Khrushchev was like, hey, you know if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the two sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of relief, except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew! Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test ban treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev, who was a kisser. He liked to kiss. Both sides were deeply concerned at the prospect of nuclear war, but still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you breathing right now? Yeah? Yeah. I wouldn't. It took the Americans
Yeah,
2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone
that's
missing
crazy.
in the ocean. This was the 14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950. Nobody knows
Damn.
how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong. And over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking point. America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops, and so in they went. From 1965, America found itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before.
That is true.
Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to...
Fun fact, my pawpaw, right? He fought in the Vietnam War, right? He fought in it, and he signed up, like he enlisted and everything, and as soon as he got home, he had the draft papers. I just think that's crazy. I just thought I'd say that, you know what I mean? Throw that in there.
tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many global conflicts that signaled a turning point.
You know,
under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive, and as a result, their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world. In the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed. And the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard.
Watch part one, I explained
the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower intervention amplified the destruction and created alarming levels of human...
Bro, look at that. That's crazy. 55, 72, 56, 57, 6. Bro. Look, that one lasted a good while. 55 to 72. Bro. That is crazy. That is crazy. Like, look at that, chat. Okay. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds, then I'm going to hit play. 75 to 91, 75 to 99, 77 to 91, 77 to 92, 78, 78 to 87, and more. That is crazy.
Human suffering throughout the third world. And in Vietnam, that human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old television. Going into the late 60s, America was a changing nation. This became this. This became this, and
Yeah.
this became this. The new slogan that was taking root: make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be
That is true.
increasingly unwinnable
Excuse me,
and
by the
public
way.
opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home and ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam by 1973. 2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers.
crazy.
In Russia, a huge percentage of the budget was still going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending
is
in
true.
order to rescue their economies.
That's
and so both
crazy,
welcomed
too.
with open arms
Like-
an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as détente. To improve relations, Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT Agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were even improving via ping-pong diplomacy when the U.S. table tennis team went on a tour of the People's Republic. However, internally, China was still pushing anti-capitalist propaganda, which led to some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
Put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Give me a pair of
Bro, that's crazy.
给我一对啊。
That's crazy. I did not know that.
Everything was going great for Nixon until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and violating constitutional protocol. I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford. Wow, you mean in America that people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption? And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is. After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna where they signed yet another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise,
I gotta
President Carter.
sneeze.
Please don't do that. But that's not to say there was no longer any
Okay, maybe not. I don't know.
tension between the two sides, because there was
Ooh.
heaps of it. Once
gotta
again, the
sneeze.
Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games were boycotted. Conservatives were concerned that US policy had become too soft, and in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism, so they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came in guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea. The Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally
Excuse me.
China had broken down. Relations took a big
Oh, wow.
hit in 1983 when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Coming into office in
That's a lot of
1985, he was the real game changer.
I like it!
Crazy spicy, ridiculously tasty. Try hot and spicy.
His philosophy differed a lot from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to find satisfaction in their work, because they weren't allowed to speak freely and lived in fear. Gorbachev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but unlike previous Soviet leaders, he actually made the change happen. Within the first couple of years, he began the political movement for more openness and transparency, and the restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems. And change very quickly took effect. People could criticize the government, they could enjoy Western pop culture, the media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated, which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades,
Yeah,
the Soviets
I
had been
was
brutally
thinking the
suppressing
same thing,
any attempt at
honestly.
change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow. Gorbachev's response: he didn't necessarily agree with the reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future. This was massive, and the Hungarian leaders began planning free, multi-party elections. Poland followed suit and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still eager to get out. They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was
Bro, that's
furious
crazy.
and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling, and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy gardens, and a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit. Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control. And worse, the biggest demonstration was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force, right guys?
Okay.
Guys? Unfortunately,
Oh.
everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over half a
Damn,
million
he
East
got
Germans
voted out
took to the
power.
streets of East Berlin.
I didn't know
And
that
There
either.
was still one big target left in their sights. That damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction, the people were allowed to pass through. East and West Berliners couldn't
crazy.
believe it and celebrated together throughout the night. Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later, Germany would be reunited. Elections in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist authority in the Eastern Bloc. America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen, as the anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate. Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev had to give in. For the first time in history, elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic.
You just
So
said it
believe
can
me,
get
this is
confusing. I'm
oversimplified,
about to get
but it
confused.
went a little bit like this. The Soviet Union was made up of a number of smaller Soviet republics, the largest of which was Russia. Yeltsin got himself elected the president of Russia and began a struggle for sovereignty against Gorbachev and the greater Soviet Union. Communist hardliners were horrified at what Gorbachev was allowing, so they briefly kidnapped him and tried to set up their own emergency government. But Yeltsin and his supporters all gathered around the White House in Moscow and were like, no, we have a tank. So the hardliners had to concede and released Gorbachev. Wow, thanks Boris. That was a close one. No problem. And thanks to you for all the great freedom you've given us. Anytime, pal. And just to inform you, I've used that freedom you've given us to go behind your back and make a deal with Ukraine and Belarus to dissolve the Soviet Union and set up the Russian Federation. In other words, you're no longer in charge. I am. Dude. So uncool. And so decades of tension and the everlasting
that's
threat of a
crazy.
nuclear
So
war
while he was
finally came to an
kidnapped and
end as
everything, he was
democratic
doing all
governments were
that.
established in many of the
I didn't
old
know that
Soviet
either.
republics.
Like,
and the
I
world
think
got
I
along
did know he
together
was kidnapped,
forever
but I
after.
didn't
Right,
know
guys?
he was, you know what I mean?
Hey, this modern art thing is growing on me. Where can I...
Oh, wait, what did that say? Something coming soon, right?
Publix. And the world got along together forever after. Right, guys?
Oh. That's what that said.
Hey,
I
this
didn't know
modern
that.
art thing is growing on me. Where can I learn to do that? Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with classes in
See,
design,
this is-
technology,
this- hold
business, and more.
This is what I was talking about. Like, if you guys want to learn how to do everything he does in editing and like his animations and stuff like that, I think this is the best way. I think it's this one. I believe. I think. I want to say I think it's this one, but don't hold me on that. Disclaimer for everything. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not 100% sure if this is it.
Learn how to code your own games and apps.
It
Learn
is.
a musical instrument.
It
Learn
is.
how to animate videos like mine. Learn Japanese. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to all of these classes and more. And better yet, everything is taught by genuine experts working in their field. Skillshare is also more affordable than other learning platforms, with an annual subscription being less than $10 a month. What's that? You wish you had an exclusive deal just for Oversimplified viewers? Well, wish no more, my friend. The first 500 people to use this link, which can be found in the description below,
That's
will
crazy.
get their first 2 months for absolutely free. Plus, you'll be supporting my channel.
See, that's a
and
good
keeping these
deal,
videos
though.
coming. So be
2
sure to
months
use the
free.
link in the description box
That's,
below
you
and
get
learn
to
something
save
new
like
today.
$20. It was a really good video. You know what I'm saying? I definitely for part 1 and for part 2, I learned some stuff I didn't know, and you know there was some stuff I threw in that I wanted to talk about real fast and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? So make sure you guys do check out part 1 if you guys have it. Check it out. And as always, I'm gonna put the link down in the description and all that good stuff. You know what I'm saying? As I said earlier in the video, part 1 will also be down there, and I think I'm gonna put his channel down there too, if I'm being honest. So, which I most likely will. So make sure you guys do like, subscribe, ring the bell if you guys are new. You know what I'm saying? I will see you guys in the next video. Positivity is key, motivation is key, happiness is key. You guys remember that, okay? You guys stay safe. The world's a crazy place for sure. So you guys stay safe, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys in the next video.